Hi everyone, FinanceFeeds is here at iFX EXPO International in sunny Limassol, Cyprus. Joining me now is Remonda Kirketerp-Møller, who is founder and CEO of regtech Muinmos. I hope I'm pronouncing all of this correctly, Remonda. Thanks for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you.
So, you founded Muinmos 11 years ago, and a lot has happened since, with the industry adapting to an increasingly complex regulatory environment. Is the FX industry still an attractive sector for businesses, do you think?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, a lot of changes have taken place over the past years, but a lot of it has been more trying to actually consolidate a lot of legislation, regulation around the world to actually make it a little bit easier for the FX industry, to be frank with you, to operate. So there's been a lot of obviously talks about, is it really still attractive in terms of all this regulation that's coming out? Regulation, actually, a lot of the regulation is not new. What's new about it is ultimately the regulators are trying to make more sense out of the framework that was once upon a time there that didn't really operate in the new digital world. So they're moving more towards trying to create a little bit more transparency of what they are actually really regulating, and how should the market operate under those rules. So the way I see it, yes, absolutely. I do think definitely that is still an attractive market for a lot of businesses.
And do you believe that different regions are trying to work together in sort of uniformity, so that different market players in different regions are maybe are not using the same exact rules or applying the same rules, but there is some uniformity that market players kind of understand what they can look forward to if they want to enter a new region?
Yeah, I think there are two problems actually I can identify with this. One, to actually have a lot of the market players, and when we refer to market players, let's refer to the businesses. We do see, and I have seen in my 20 plus years in the sector, that they copy each other. And I think that's a major problem. They could be in completely different regulatory environments, landscapes, in onboarding very different segmentations, and they like what they see down the road, they copy it, and there's actually not really a clear understanding of what they're doing. So that's one area. Then you could also say the regulators, actually we're seeing even regulators copying each other without deep understanding of the local needs and market and the businesses that are actually onboarding in their jurisdictions. I think it's fantastic to learn from each other, but not to copy and paste. That's one of the biggest problems we see currently in this space.
Well, it seems to me like in my experience, in terms of FX regulation, a lot of it starts out in the United States a lot of the time, and then it migrates to, let's say, the UK with the FCA, Australia with ASIC, and then further down the road. Do you think that sort of has shifted over the years? Because some of the things that we want to discuss today is the Spanish sort of proposed restrictions on marketing certain products and things like that. Do you think that this global process has sort of shifted over the last
absolutely. I can definitely say that you could definitely argue that the US used to lead on that front, but there's no doubt, I think, to the market expert players that they're seeing that shifted to the UK FCA. And one of the main primary reasons for that is they started understanding the new digital world we operate in. They were the first to create the sandboxes. They were the first to bring the regtechs into play. They were the first to try to understand what is your new business model. Can we be part of understanding and potentially also regulating and pushing out into the market as a framework for actually a product that's kind of semi-endorsed. And I would say where the US used to play a bigger, if you like, kind of driver in the market, is they were quickly on the fines. They basically really started saying to businesses, why are you coming and trespassing in my jurisdiction? I'm just going to fine you. Where the UK FCA is actually trying to understand what are you doing and bringing the parties into the equation. And that could be the regulators in America, the regulators in Europe now with Brexit, the regulators in Australia and so forth. That's very, very definitely shifted compared to the early days. Absolutely.
Yep. So your company has become one of the most in-demand providers of KYC and AML solutions. If I could ask you specifically on the MCheck and MPass solutions, how do they compare or differentiate from your competitors?
Yeah, it's a really good question actually, because typically one of the biggest problems we see in the market is when you talk to people about onboarding, they see one thing, KYC AML. Onboarding is not just about KYC AML. Onboarding is about clearing the product, for example. Can I onboard you to trade a particular product? Can I onboard you cross borders? Can I allow you the product based on suitability and appropriateness? How is the product really, distributed and defined? And then, of course, you could say, following from the clearances of that, which is under our MPass, it moves very quickly into MCheck, which is the KYC AML clearances. Of course, there are many providers in this space offering that. Nobody today is doing ultimately the product clearances. There are a lot of players are doing bits and pieces of the KYC AML, but nobody's connecting the dots to create that transparent framework, empowering the institution on what they need to do based on their local requirements and jurisdictional requirements. That's super powerful. And then very quickly it moves to the CRA, which is really the client risk assessment. That's ongoing. It doesn't stop for the entire life cycle. So our biggest differentiator is we connected the dots across the entire onboarding equation.
That's great. So the legal and compliance team don't need to sit there and scratch their heads, right?
Absolutely.
Awesome. That's perfect. A very in-depth question. From a geographical expansion perspective, the way brokers determine country AML equivalence is known to be quite a gray area at the moment. At the same time, brokers can lose their business if they don't move forward in time, right? They could lose out. How does Muinmos' MPass help brokers address this particular issue?
It's a bit like I mentioned a few moments ago. The cross-border elements are very important. If you look at a lot of institutions, you mentioned that at the beginning of our interview, where many are copying each other. You can't copy each other if you're in two different jurisdictions. The requirements are simply different. They're different on the product clearance, they're different on the KYC AML, they're different on the risk. So the best way for the institutions really to keep up is to make sure that they're using digitizations in this space for this. You can't do this using 10,000 lawyers. You can't do this hiring hundreds and thousands of compliance officers and regulatory experts. You have to automate it, and you have to work with providers in this space that understand that level of complexity, because it's enormously complex. It's not little.
Well, in a recent op-ed, you shared your opinion on ESMA and CNVM's, the Spanish regulator, their enhanced marketing restrictions on high-risk derivative products for retail clients, right? CFDs really is what we're speaking about. This kind of sort of what I would call overprotection has been called the nanny state, right? But in 2023, it seems more of like a Barbie and Ken situation, right? If we could call it that. Can you sort of sum up your opposition, I would say, to these new rules that you sort of formulated in the op-ed?
Absolutely. I absolutely favor regulation. I'm a lawyer, so of course I'm in favor of having a regulatory framework for the market to operate under. But what I'm definitely opposing here is pretty much, if you look at ESMA in general, it's done enormous amounts of value in this space right now to create transparency, create clarity, to enhance harmonization, and to ensure that we stick to that. But the problem we're seeing right now is a lot of regulators, let's keep it to Europe since this is on a European level. There's a lot happening in Europe right now where a lot of regulators, if they find it a challenge, they want to stop it. That is not the way to solve the problem. The way to solve the problem is understand why it's a challenge, understand how you can solve it. Preventing people that are adults that can make decisions from doing something is really insane in my point of view. It's absolutely insane. What's going to happen here? You're going to create a lot of regulatory arbitrage. You're going to start seeing a lot of institutions ceasing doing business, for example, in Spain, and moving that operation maybe to another part of the European Union. That's not the way to solve this problem. The way to solve the problem is tackle the problem. If Spain is worried about the complaints they've received over the past years due to this, then tackle that problem. Don't be afraid of actually sitting down and establishing how can we solve this and keep the European Union powerful, keep free freedom of expression powerful, and ensure also the level of harmonization across the European Union. So there's definitely a lot to be said on that level, and that's probably my opposition. Not specifically targeting whether ESMA has done the right thing or not, but to make sure that actually we start looking at this differently.
And I think also, as you mentioned, if it's very difficult to understand it, then you really have to take a deep dive and think about, like for me personally, I think, well, what is making this or that particular retail instrument, right, financial instrument, attractive to a trader? They could be in their 20s, they could be in their 30s, they could be older, whatever. If they have the means to trade, they'll probably do it. But what makes them attracted to it in the first place, right? And I think if you can't tackle that question, then you'll never understand, how to properly protect those traders and also protect the company providing the services. Because, like you said, I think it's very unfair to just basically say, oh, well, we're not sure what you're doing, so you can't do that right now.
Exactly. And it's also unfair on financial institutions that are really doing the right thing. We definitely see that almost every pretty much day, where we see a lot of regulators want to ensure compliance, they want to ensure they're doing the right thing, and they want to ensure also that they gain that element of transparency of tell us what you need us to do to make sure we're not actually in breach of anything. And there are definitely some issues there where the law is grey. It's simply grey. They don't know what to do. And I think to answer your question, it's not just you're marketing there for the trading because of the heavy marketing. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, these are grown-up, adults that you could be marketing many other things that are not good for them. And some individuals go out and say, well, if I want to smoke, I want to smoke. If I want to drink, I want to drink. You can't really stop that. But I think what's really fundamental here is to actually make sure you allow them the education that could, in fact, enhance the market's understanding. Those investors, whether they're 20, whether they're 30, whether they're 50, whether they're 70, it's irrelevant really based on the age. What I actually was disturbed by is even the educational element under the new regime that came out of Spain was also restricted. And to me, the only way to really fix this problem is by allowing the brokers to educate their clients on what is it exactly these products entail, what are the risks, do you still want to trade them? And I think if you create more control over that, you're going to definitely enhance the level of compliance in the area, because many definitely brokers want to comply.
Yeah, of course.
To be frank.
Of course. And, I would say it's not necessarily even a question of marketing. People find things to do on their own, right?
Yes.
People, especially people that are into something speculative, right? There's obviously a casino here in this venue that we have the conference at, right? So if you're prone to sort of risk taking, you might find a brokerage or some sort of services on your own without any kind of marketing, and be interested in using them.
Absolutely. Yeah. We have a casino upstairs. You're not going to stop people entering. If they're the right legal age, they may lose a lot more than what they have in their bank account today. That is not something you can stop and control, and that's ultimately what's happening.
Sure. And I guess my next question is, what do you think is going to be the outcome of all of this? And I guess in the context of, I speak to other market participants, for example, people on the institutional side of things, they're telling me that they're constantly sort of, there's an evolution of products that they come out with. So, if we say, oh, okay, so certain CFDs are now restricted in a particular country or jurisdiction, do you think this is going to lead to basically more innovation from institutional firms, retail firms, to basically create new product sets that may be more easy to understand both for the trader and the regulator? Or something that is essentially maybe more liquid, if we can call something more liquid than a different product? Sort of, what do you think?
Yeah, to be frank with you, I think you're always going to find pretty much creativity in this space, purely and simply. When something is prohibited, you're going to go and find ways around it. If it's restricted, you're going to go and find ways around it. And this is exactly why I mentioned prior to this, it's education. It's for the regulators to try to enhance that level in the marketplace, in their own market. When they're dealing, for example, whether it's Spain, whether it's Germany, whether it's Holland, whether it's France, they should just make sure that this is exactly the level of education that they can start bringing to the market. No different from anything else really that's happening, not just in this space, in other segments as well. And I think the problem we are going to see is this, and then the regulator's going to be playing catch.
Yep.
And that is just a very, very bad way of allowing the market to operate. And there is no limit to how far this can go. And I ultimately disagree with the way that's operating right now.
Yep.
I think it's much more powerful to hit the problem, find the solution to it, allow CFDs because they've been in this space for long. Everyone understands them. The risks are clearly there. We've installed a lot of restrictions in the past under, of course, the ESMA umbrella with CFD restrictions, with negative balance protection, with many other parameters that should really enhance that. I think ultimately now what they need to do is make sure that those are complied with than to go to the next level, because there's a lot more we can do there that isn't being done currently. By in fact, I would say close to any regulator in the union.
I guess my last question would be, considering everything that we already discussed, what do you think are some of the upcoming regulatory challenges for the FX industry, sort of as we start wrapping up 2023 and 2024? Kind of, what are they in your view?
My biggest fear is the regulators start copying each other, because that's the easy way out. That's my biggest fear. And if I'm to predict, I hope that's one of the worst predictions, because I really don't want it. And I actually think they need to think independently. They need to start hiring people from the market that understand what's going on. They need to start creating guidelines that make sense in their jurisdiction. They may need to sit around the table together and discuss their challenges, discuss ways of resolving this. I know for a fact the stock market did this years ago, and it worked wonders. And I think the regulators need to start thinking in that direction than to start almost, I like what the FCA has done, I'll copy it. I like what they did, I'll copy it. I like what, for example, BaFin has done, or the MFA or whatever. That's the wrong approach in my opinion. So I really, really hope that a little bit more goes into the regulators to start actually understanding in depth of what's going on, understand in depth how they can solve it, understand in depth how they can work together, because it's super important for us to keep the harmonization in the union. We need to avoid at all costs regulatory arbitrage, which is one of the biggest problems we have seen over the years, and with Brexit it became an even more apparent problem.
Sure, yeah. No. Well, thank you for making those important points. Remonda, thanks for joining us today. It was a pleasure to meet you. Good luck the rest of the way at the conference, and in 2023 we hope to see you soon.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.